Hi, my name is Pablo Montoya. I'm here with the Civic Archive Group,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing a oral history project. And today we are here with. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Do you want me to look at the camera?
You can look at me. You can look at the camera.
Okay, all right. Hi, my name is Rafael Solorzano.
So, where were you born, Mr. Solorzano?
Actually, I was born here in Orange County. I was born in the city of Orange. And my parents are immigrants, but I have lived half of my life here in Santa Ana and then half of my life actually in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yes.
So, what was it like growing up for you here in Orange County?
Growing up in Santana was quite different, right? And I say that because I had the opportunity to also live in other places in the world or in other countries or, in other cities in the United States. I attended Fremont Elementary School, right, which is in the Artesia Pilar neighborhood. I went to Spurgeon Intermediate, and then I went on to Santa Ana High School, where actually all my sisters and cousins attended. And so my experience there was very interesting. Now that I reflect back, it's very interesting because growing up, in my neighborhood, I live in front of El Salvador Park. In the 80s and in the early 90s was a tough place to live in, right? I say that because, at that time when I was going to Fremont Elementary School, we were a California distinguished school, but at the same time, many of my fellow peers, a lot of the boys, as we were growing up, were also entering gangs, right? And so it's very interesting growing up, going to a really kind of distinguished elementary school, having to lose like a lot of my friends to gangs, right? The local gang that was there in El Salvador Park, and then come, junior high school, some of these young men, I didn't see them anymore, right? And especially in high school, and these are, boys that I grew up with, that lived around my block, down my block, who my sisters went to school with their sisters and brothers, and then also growing up in the early 90s and going to high school, at Santa Ana High School was also very interesting. As I reflect back, and I look at, the comparison of, the violence, right? Community violence that happened in our community. People always go back to the early 90s of Santa Ana as saying, oh, Santa Ana, it's not as bad as it was like in the early 90s in Santa Ana, right? Where we had so many homicides, right? Interesting enough, I was growing up in high school at that time. I always share the story with the young men that I work with about there was never a time where we went to a party, a house party, that it didn't end in gunshots or drive-bys. And I'm not kidding, right? There was 2 parties where right outside, friends of ours were actually shot, and it's so interesting back then, these were simple, what you would call kickbacks, right? You'd go hang out at your friend's house after the football game, right? It was something very normal. Everybody does that. But what was not normal was how sometimes it ended. What made people go home. What was not normal is knowing people, in high school who had been shot, or no longer there with you anymore, right? And so, to me, as I reflect back to my high school years, it's interesting because I think as young men, right, we normalized it. It was okay. It was okay to attend these parties, and that's how they ended.
What you spoke about California distinguished schools, right?
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Well, it means like that we were like a high performing school, right? So the way that schools are now compared to each other is differently. Back then we had STAR testing, right? Now there's different type of testing, statewide testing standards or Common Core standards that are being implemented throughout the state, right? But back then, we had STAR testing, and so through STAR testing, your school is evaluated and assessed to as being high performing or not, right? And so, right now I think they do the same thing. They recognize schools for being, like distinguished schools in California and also nationally. Like I think nationally it's like blue ribbon schools or something like that.
You spoke about violence in your community growing in the 90s, especially in high school.
Right.
How did that affect you? How did that affect who you are now? Like, do you,
Well, it affected me because, I left home when I was 18 years old, right? And so, and I went to school, right? And so I went to school in the Bay Area. And I was very fortunate enough and blessed to actually meet people who were from different communities than I was, right? When I went to school, the people who were in, at my school were majority white, where I was coming from a high school that was majority Mexican, right? It was majority immigrant, was majority Latino, but there were Mexican immigrants. And so here I go to a school where I become like the single only person of color in a classroom, right? But then I was able to meet other people just like me that were from San Francisco, that were from Oakland, that were from Los Angeles, that were from Fresno, right? And they too actually lived through these challenges, right? And were able to also go into higher education, right? And through that experience, we shared stories, and we learned from each other. We learned about even the things that they were doing in their community to improve, their neighborhoods. And I remember just because one thing that's very key to understand is I went to college in 1996, right? In 1994, there was a statewide ballot called Proposition 187, right? That denied education, social services, and medical assistance to undocumented people here in the state of California, right? And so that impacted us all. Growing up Latino in California in 1994 is like you were the target. You were seen as, the illegal alien. I think it was then where the term illegal alien really became popularized. And so what ended up happening in college is I met all these other leaders that were at my university that also were organizing in their high schools against this proposition. So that was an amazing experience to see, so it wasn't only me and my friends here in Santa Ana, walking out or organizing or educating our community against voting against Proposition 187. I met these amazing other leaders from, like I mentioned before, Oakland, San Francisco, East Los Angeles, that were doing the same exact thing. And so I was able to meet other leaders and build community with them, and so that really kind of changed my life. It has definitely changed my life, and then in meeting them and going to school, in the East Bay, right in the Bay Area, we continue to do those efforts. I continue to learn. I continue to meet, professors and long-term activists, people who organized in the civil rights movement. I had that opportunity, to work alongside with them. I was able to meet people who were involved in the Chicano movement. They were my professors, this was an experience that I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to, and then I decided to stay in the Bay Area, right? Because then after college, I decided to continue to do the work, right? Continue to work in Oakland, and in working with Oakland, I continue to work with the same community, right? Immigrant community, African American community, low income community, right? That we're fighting for at that time for, an opportunity to go to like schools, have equal education, access to higher education. At that time, I think there was campaigns around stopping the California exit exam. There was campaigns around schools, not jails, and students were organizing around stopping the city or the county building like juvenile justice halls, in cities. Young people were organizing against stopping the building of jails, right? They were linking this whole idea of the building of the prison industrial complex. And so that all was a learning experience.
So you just spoke about doing community work, and where'd you go to school, and what'd you major in?
Interesting. I ended up attending undergraduate and graduate school at the University of California at Berkeley. You ask, what did I major in? I went through so many majors. At first, when I went in there, I wanted to be a lawyer. So, or I wanted to be a politician. So I took government class. I didn't like government class. And I said, I don't think I want to be a politician. I don't like the idea of being a politician or how that system works of government. So I thought, I'll be a lawyer. Or actually, a lot of my friends wanted to be businessmen. And I'm all like, well, it doesn't hurt to be a businessman. Or, so I even thought about doing business. And so I believe like my second semester of my freshman year, I enrolled in all these classes to be a business major. But there's actually one thing that really changed everything for me. During my freshman year at Berkeley, there is a course that all freshmen need to take, right? It's a writing course. And in your first semester, you have to complete this portfolio of all your writing, your best writing, right? And what happens is you get a grade for that semester, but that's not your final grade. Your final grade is given to you by another professor who reads your portfolio. That wasn't with you the whole semester. So I got a good grade on my portfolio, right? The portfolio I turned in, I think all my papers were A papers, right? I think at that time, I thought I was a good writer. The week of Christmas, I get a letter from the professor who read my portfolio. He gave me a D from my portfolio. And he wrote a huge long letter about why he gave me a D. He said I had a very nice essay structure, and that I had great experiences that were documented in my essay, but I didn't know how to write an argumentative essay. That I lacked that. And of course, it broke me. I'm all, who is this professor? What does he teach? What does he know? And underneath that letter that was typed by this professor, there was a note from my professor that I had the class with. And she said, Rafa, this shows you, how people look at writing differently. Don't get discouraged. You're a good writer. We're passing you. Okay? I looked up that professor. And that professor was a rhetoric professor. Right? So there's a department at UC Berkeley called rhetoric. And I looked it up. And that class, in that department focuses on argumentative writing. Right? The theory of argumentative writing. right? The art of argumentative writing, right? The art of persuasion. So, of course he's going to say that about my papers because this guy's a pro. I obviously maybe didn't convince him in my essays, right? I probably didn't have like the structure that he was looking for. But then that made me really think about, okay, so does this, like, what is this rhetoric? So I signed up for a rhetoric writing class my second semester, and I fell in love with it. And so I ended up becoming a rhetoric major with an emphasis on public discourse. And with that, I was just like, I want to be a lawyer. Because I felt like, okay, I mean, because that's what they train you to be. That major trains you to just like, I mean, argue somebody to death and win and persuade them, right? But then also there was something that was really, how do I say, in me that I felt like I needed to learn, and that was my history, right? Something that rhetoric didn't give me was history, right, of my culture, of my community, and so I ended up deciding to do Chicano studies. And that's a whole another story, too.
Yeah. Mike.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, like the sound wasn't distorted.
Okay.
You lost one.
So you majored in rhetoric, you said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what did you come back to do in Santa Ana? Like, how did that help you do the work you're doing in Santa Ana?
Good question. So after I graduated, doing my undergrad, I think my later years, I mean, there's like 4 years. Every year something happened in my life that changed me, right? That, that made me, wanted to work in laws, wanted to work in public policy, me to work in education, wanted me to be a teacher. So actually, after, graduating from Berkeley, I became, a history teacher, right? I had the opportunity to teach ethnic studies. I had the opportunity to teach Raza studies, right? My experience being a teacher was amazing because I had this one mentor. He was an ex-Black Panther, right? Dr. Littleton, right? Amazing man. And I remember in 2001 or in 2000, I had mentioned to him, I think I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to go back to Santana. And he said to me, he's all like, Rafa, he's all, do you know the hardest place to organize is your hometown? It's going to be the hardest place to organize. And he asked me, have you built all the tools that you need in order for you to go back home? Do you think you've learned what you need to learn? And at that time, I'm in my early 20s. This is like 15 years ago. And I'm all like, yeah, I think I could do this, But I ended up deciding to stay. And so I ended up deciding to stay and do work around educational justice. So I left teaching and I started to work with an organization that did community organizing and did public policy work to change, the education policies in the state of California, right? That really reflected the communities that were living in California at that time, right? Because what you have in the 90s and the early 2000s is you begin to have a shift, right? Of people of color becoming the majority in the state of California. And with that shift, you begin to see that there's an attack on education, right? There's an attack of who can access public education, right? Education becomes more expensive to go to the university. So you have the increase of like tuitions. You begin to have like a lot of the educational justice wins that happened in the 60s and 70s be attacked by Republican political parties and conservatives, right? You have the dismantling of ethnic studies in the universities. You have dismantling of Chicano studies. You have dismantling of like, programs to help, low socioeconomic students, right? So this is all happening at the same time. And so, I said, you know what? My role right now is not to be a teacher. My role is to work in the community to address these fights. And so I did that for 5 years. And I did that work in Oakland. And once again, I was blessed to work with a community that was, in this case, majority African American. Taught me how to work with people who weren't your same race, that didn't grow up in the same culture. They spoke maybe sometimes a different language, right? And taught me how the importance of multiracial alliance building. Taught me that if you want to get stuff done, you need to build coalitions, right? And coalitions that cross racial lines, and the importance of doing that within a changing landscape in the state of California, right? And what it means to do that, and to work hard to do that, because it's not easy. It's not easy, right? I remember my first students that I would work with would call me Ese, because they would call all Latinos and Mexicanos Eses. We didn't have names. We're called Eses, right? And so, it kind of speaks to, the experiences that I heard about the young men that went last year to camp. For them, it was like the first time that they had actually socialized with African American young men, and it reminds me of like, wow, that was me in the 90s. Like, I didn't know, right? Because you're instilled with all this fear that the media teaches you, the criminalization of young men. And so here I am working in Deep East Oakland, working with these same young men, becoming leaders, making them leaders, and they had like the most talent. I could, in one finger. They're all rappers, they're all MCs. They had all these great stories. They could organize. It was the most, grateful experience I could have. And doing that work, I think all the way up to 2005 and 2006, made me say, okay, I need to come back to Santana. And that's when I came back.
So what is your position now in the community?
Now in the community, I returned in 2005, but then again I left, but I went because of school again, right? So I went on to do graduate school, and I returned to actually to be with my family, right? Because my dad is ill, right? And so me returning, was because of family reasons. Ones that I believe are good reasons, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to be with my father and to like care for my father, because he was the first male role model I ever had, good or bad, but this past year I had the experience to meet a couple young men who went to a camp last year, which was called Boys and Men of Color. And through their experience, I really was motivated and inspired to do the work that I'm doing now. And now I kind of lead as one of the coordinators of the Boys and Men of Color working group here in Santa Ana.
So what is Boys and Men of Color? What do they do? What do they stand for?
The Santa Ana Boys and Men of Color actually is a statewide. It's part and parcel of a statewide initiative by the California Endowment, right? But I think their main goal is to address the life chances of boys and men of color, right? In this case, when we speak about Santa Ana, is specifically talking about probably Latino immigrant, Mexican immigrants, and also South Asian, right? Southeast Asian, so the Vietnamese community, and also Cambodian community. Right, and so what I mean by increasing the life chances, right, is opportunities and access to quality education, good jobs with benefits, access to mental health, access to services and resources, right? Accesses to parks, you know, some things that are sometimes, you know, I feel not seen as rights, but they are. You know, we should all have access to a good education, right? And access to the resources our community or our cities provide us with, right?
Yeah.
So I feel that's you know, some of the overall goals of Santa Ana Boys and Men of Color, right? But we all also have specific ones as well.
Does Boys and Men of Color help address or define what masculinity is, or what the role, you know, the role it has in our community?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I expect that one.
No, I knew these were all good questions. That's the hard question. And I remember asking that question probably during the first working meetings, right? And I think the question that I asked one time, I believe in the check-in, was how can we redefine masculinity through the work that we do with the Santa Ana Boys and Men of Color Working Group? And I think that's what we're doing, right? I think masculinity is seen differently by different cultures. But when we think about masculinity here in Santa Ana, we think about another word called machismo, right? There is good and bad things about machismo. There's different characteristics of machismo. And I feel through this work, we're creating new types of masculinities. And when I say that is that I'm thinking of masculinities, they're not just gendered, that just do not only apply to men, but also apply to women, to boys, right? Because things are dynamic. And I think this idea of machismo in some ways does not recognize our changing cultures or recognize our changing communities, right? Or our very multiracial communities, our diverse communities. And so I think it's really creating a new type of masculinity, one that sees strength as different, right? That sees you know, strength not just as like physical prowess, you know, like you know,
I'm stronger than you.
yeah, I'm stronger than you, something about dominance. No, I think it's about strengths, about pride, right? About resiliency, about, you know, being faced with a challenge, but being able to overcome that challenge, right? In a positive way, right? Because I feel that masculinity is so much, if like you don't have a component of it, then you're quickly tagged as weak, as the feminine, you know? Why can you not be masculine and be feminine, right? There's so much at times put in binaries, like negative or positive, right? So I think the work is really kind of trying to change the, you know, the definition of masculinity.
What are some examples that BMOC or Boys and Men of Color has done to define or help define masculinity?
Oh, I think one of them, you know, there's two, right? Okay. The work that we do in circles. I think the work when we're faced with challenges that we have dialogues in circles, right? Men aren't supposed to talk, right? Machismo teaches us that we're supposed to be silent, suck it up, aguantate, right? And to be oral and to share is to break that. You know, to talk about something breaks these ideas of masculinity, this idea of machismo, right? And the work that we want to engage in around restorative justice, right? The work that we want to engage in la cultura cura through these circles that address, trauma of our young men, right? Is work that we teach ourselves and other young men to begin to talk, to begin to share with each other, because that's when healing is going to happen, right? Because I think masculinity and machismo teaches us to heal is to aguántate. That's how you're going to heal. Like, you'll get better si te aguantas. Like, you know, that's I remember you get sick. Oh, no, aguántate si te da un dolor, right? If it hurts, aguántate, you know, you'll get better, right? But I think when you think about that, like what it means to a community, right? When we say, no, ya no me voy a aguantar, like, I'm going to address this, right? I think that's what Boys and Men of Color is trying to do. We're breaking that, and we're saying, no, we're going to address this, and we're going to provide solutions.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you think masculinity affects our community here in Santana? Or what kind of roles do you think masculinity plays here?
Well, I could give you one that I feel it's not because of us, but I think institutions put on us, right? And I feel our masculinity, right, has been criminalized, right? And so when you ask the question, how has masculinity affected the community? I feel in some way that institutions like the media, right? Institutions that are supposed to keep us safe, like the police department, right? They criminalize our young men, right? Because they paint our young men, they create this like imaginary young kind of criminal of our Latino men, and they paint it all over the media, and they the way we dress, you know, because we wear a hoodie, because we wear white shirts, they begin to you know, feed it. They begin to like feed fear to people, and I think that's what masculinity hurts us. That's how it's hurting the community, right? I don't feel it's so, you know, and we also hurt ourselves too. But I think when we think about it in an institutional level, right? When we think about it outside of just like interpersonal, how I hurt you, right? Because that does happen. But when we think about like institutions, right? Like the police department, like even educational system, when we think about the media, right? I feel that's how it's turning against us. You know, I remember growing up in high school, they would have a flyer of like, this is what a tagger looks like. And when you saw what a tagger looked like, it looked like every young man in Santana, with the backpack, with the hoodie, with baggy pants, with sneakers. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, you know, it wasn't, you know, it was specifically a certain type of like image that they were putting out there, right?
Do you think there's a way BMOC or a way we can fix masculinity in our community, or a way BMOC can have a role in helping to address masculinity?
I think shifting, helping shift like the public image that young men have, right? I'm really big about public opinion, right? If we could start getting people to think that our young men are assets in our community, that our young men are leaders in our community, that our young boys can be part of the change, then we're doing good, right? Because right now, when people think about our boys and our young men and our men period, it's like words like huevón, lazy, no good. Those are the first words that come out, right? But if we start saying, but if we start changing that public opinion, like, right, highlighting the good work that we're doing, then people can say leaders, dedicated, hard workers, smart, right? Yeah. And growing up in Santana, we were that. We are that. But it's the media that portrays other images of us. You know, so I think Boys and Men of Color, we need to lift those images up at any time that we can. When young men do conferences, we need to uplift that and show them this is what our young men are doing. When we bring together young men with adults to solve problems, then we need to uplift that, right? When we have young men coming together talking about like positive school discipline, solutions such as restorative justice, we need to uplift that, right? Because if we don't do it, we know what the other side is going to do.
Where do you see, bless you, where do you see boys and men of color in 5 years?
In 5 years,
Where do you hope to see it?
I hope to see that it's still around, right? I hope that the working group is continuing, that the working group is still continues to be diverse, that the working group continues to have, boys, young men, and adult allies involved, multi-gendered, from different communities of Santa Ana. I hope that it expands to Anaheim, Garden Grove, Orange County. I also feel that hopefully in 5 years that we would address, the issues of negative school discipline that happen in our schools. I really hope that we begin to address the lack of opportunities that we have from people that are coming out of the system, right? Giving them opportunities, right? That they don't get caught up again in that cycle of coming out of jail or the halls and they get right back in there, right? Because I think part of the process is, part of the fight is like, we're not going to help our community if we don't help these specific type of men that are coming out, right? Because they sometimes are providers for families, right? And I feel that this cycle of just imprisonment, right? This cycle of just putting them right back in the hall, right? Because we don't have structures for them or resources for them when they come out, right? I feel it's destructive to our family. I think it's destructive for our communities. And I think for 5 years from now, I hope we do have something like Homeboy Industries that has in East LA, right? Where people can go and they can get jobs, people can go, they can get counseling, and then not go back into the system. And then we can celebrate those things. We can celebrate them. I think that would be awesome. Not just celebrate the ones that go to Stanford or go to Berkeley, but we celebrate the ones that couldn't get that GED 10 years ago, but now they came out of the hall or jail, and now they got their GED.
What would be some advice you would give to our young boys and men of color?
One that I always tell a lot of the young men that I work with and young women is that, and this is something that my dad taught me, through tough love, I guess, is that idea of sacrificio. Everything takes sacrifice, right? Nothing is easy, right? It's not just about things are going to come easy to you, right? Is that if you work hard, right? And I feel the word sacrifice, y sacrificio, means different in Spanish and English. How it's used, because I think culturally our parents, grow up in these communities sacrificing a lot, in the hope that later on down the road that things will be better. And so sacrificio and faith are really connected together. So something I share with young men and young women and all my friends is that we need to be prepared to sacrifice, but also have faith that things are going to get better, because that moves us forward. And so it's the whole idea of kind of like, si Dios quiere, right? It's not so much that it's God's will, but just understand and have faith that it might happen.
Are there any additional questions? Well, I was going to talk about it earlier. Is there anything you would like to add, or like to add, or we put, you want to put in there before we, before I start asking you more questions?
How does it feel coming back to Santa Ana?
Mm. Mm. I love it. I love it. You know, I mentioned how like half of my life I've lived in the Bay Area and half of my life I lived here. I have people always saying like, Rafa, when you're coming back? When are you coming back, right? And you know, it's like you make your community wherever you live, wherever you feel comfortable. I agree with that. You know, I've lived in Mexico too, right? And I love that too. I'm all, man, I'm coming back and I'm living here, right? My dream is to one day live in El DF. You know, I want to live in El DF. I know I can't do that right now because of my family, but that is a dream of mine. That means I will have to leave Santa Ana. But I think coming back to Santa Ana is good because I've only been back for a year, right? Because remember I left. And a lot of stuff has happened, and it's good stuff. A lot of good stuff. I see a lot of new faces that are like up and coming leaders, and like I said, it gives me faith. You know, and I'm just like, wow, so much potential, and I think things are going to be better for this city. You know, like I think last time, Pablo, you gave me a tour of this library, right? And you showed me teen space downstairs. I mean, we didn't have teen space. We didn't have a lot of the resources that exist now, which is amazing. Which only, you know, it's kind of like an indicator to me how things are changing. You know, that people are investing in our young people, right? I mean, you know, in school, in high school and junior high, it's like people told you, teachers told you, right? Find a place you can study at your house. I was like, what are you talking about? There's no single room in my house that I can study in quietly. So I came here. I came here to the Santa Ana Public Library, and I think I shared with you, Pablo, about like how sometimes, I mean, I had to, you know, like stalk the cubicles, right? Because we had little cubicles before, and so like I had to like stand by the bookcase, and once somebody left, I would like, you know, that would be my world, the little cubicle. We didn't have teen space. There was no youth groups, nothing in the library, and I remember there was no tutoring even in my high school, right? And so when I would get tutoring for chemistry, I would come here, get the chemistry book, open it up, and compare it with the chemistry book I had, because I had no idea what my chemistry book had. So I was like, maybe this one will help me out. And that's how I passed chemistry in high school. You know, it was, you know, it was a trip.
What was a memory that stands out from you, like, you know, your youth growing up? What was a big memory or a good memory?
Good memory. So many. Like, what do you want? Like a specific one, or just like even with my family, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not answering. You're the one answering.
Okay.
You can pick, choose. You can like more than one.
Whatever you want recorded.
Yeah, whatever you want recorded.
Oh, whatever I want recorded.
Yeah, whatever you feel.
Oh,
like
it could
is,
be
you know,
cheesy, huh?
Yeah.
Could
whatever
be
you
put
want
in
the
his.
history room, man. Maybe cheesy, not cheesy, extra cheesy.
I spoke a little bit about the marches and the walkouts of Proposition 187.
Were you part of those walkouts?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you walked out like in a movie?
Yeah, I kind of chanted people, walk out, walk out.
Really? That's pretty cool.
And there's like press and everything for that. You can look it up in the register.
In high school?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 1993 or 94. I'll say that. Well, what else? Yeah, I'll say that. Well,
Anything you want.
okay.
All up to you.
So my political consciousness, right? Me being who I am, I have to give it a lot of credit to my sisters and to my dad, right? My dad was a janitor, worked at Rockwell, long time ago, but then he got injured, right? But when he was at Rockwell, he was part of a union. So I saw him fight for his rights when he was in a union. So I learned from that. Then after, he got injured, we started working in the swamp meets. And so I started working in a swamp meet when I was like 1984. So I think I was like 15. No, I was like 6 or no. I was like 7 or something like that. So like at 7, I started, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if any of you have ever worked at the swamp meet, but like you wake up at 5 in the morning because you got to start setting up, and you're like puesto, your stand has to be up, like ready to go, like at 7, and we would sell beds, right? And there's a long story about we sold beds, but where, I don't know if you know this, but where the Santa Ana police station's at, right? And that in the front there's that the parking lot, okay? That all there was like just flat parking. And every Saturday and Sunday it became Santa Ana's swamp meet. Do you guys know about this? Okay. It was the biggest swamp meet in Orange County, and it was the most profiting swamp meet in Orange County. Okay? Then the city closed it down because the city wanted to build a police department, right? So there was a fight because all those vendors, right, did not want to lose their job because that was their income, right? So do you think the city gave them an option? No. The city didn't give them an option. The city didn't say, okay, all you vendors, right, we'll put you over here. No. So my dad ended up with other people forming a group called NOVA, National Organization for Vendors of America. I mean, it wasn't national, but it was here in Santana. And so it was all these vendors that spoke Spanish, not really English, that organized against the city to not close that swamp meet, or to force the city to find like another space for the swamp meet. And then they eventually found the one at Santa Ana College. I don't know if you knew there was one at Santa Ana College. That one, like to sell at Santa Ana College, cost you money because it made money. I think they charged like $1 to go into the swamp. Because I'm telling you, you build a swamp meet in Santana, people will come and buy. And it was good stuff, right? And then they closed that one down too. And it's all same thing. It's all political. It'd be great if you did a history on swamp meets in Santana. So through that, I learned to become political because I saw my sisters get involved in the fight to save the swamp meets. So there's like videos of my sisters like up in City Hall, like your age, like 18, 17, like at Santa Ana College. They're like mechistas, right? And they're all politically conscious. I mean, they would go to like marches. I mean, this time I'm young, right? I'm like 12. I'm like, y'all are crazy. Pero I learned, I saw what was going on. I mean, they were going on marches with Cesar Chavez. I mean, I mean, they were doing we couldn't eat grapes in our house. We couldn't eat lettuce because my sisters were all like, boycott that stuff, right? But all of that influenced me. So when 187 hit in 94, like I knew what was down. I knew this was racist. I knew this was hate. And then I just started educating and politicizing my friends. And I think I think I felt so special because there were so many other young men and women that were like, ya basta. We're walking out, we're changing these things, And so what was so cool is at that time, we had walkouts, we had these like they got so big that we had Channel 4 and of course they had to choose a nice school at that time, which was Century. And so at Century High School, they did you laugh now, but it was the nicest school back then. It was the new school. But they opened up Century and they did a live student community forum around Proposition 187. And I think it was like the first time where I thought, man, we have influence. Quien sabía, right? I mean, you walk out some people, you pass out some flyers, you organize youth at Santa Ana High School, and then other youth from Valley were being organized. Other, we became organized. It wasn't just like, people just blowing out whatever. We started like forming county-wide. Then there was walkouts at Fullerton. There was walkouts at like all over the county, where you didn't think at that time there was Latinos, and there was, and then we just ended up having having reporters. They even did, I don't know, you could probably look this up in the news. Channel 4 also did, or Channel 2 did a forum at our gym at Santa Ana High School to talk about Proposition 187. So the whole school was invited to the gym, and they did a panel and everything like that. Yeah, and that's all recorded. That happened. Yeah, and you know what it was? It was also, it happened through negotiations, because at that time it was Principal Bratcher. Principal Bratcher was all like, I'm all like, Rafa, what would it take for you to stop walking students out? And I'm all like, well, it's not me. It's like other people too. I don't want to name them because but there is other people too. It was like a group of us, right? And we're all like, okay, we want this. We want the media. We want a rally. We want access to do workshops. And it happened. That's the most proudest, I guess, one of the coolest things. Being part of the 187, walkouts. Which then I later found out that it happened statewide.
Part of something bigger than just.
Yeah, I felt that we were the only ones doing it, but no, they're doing it in LA, they're doing it in Salinas, they're doing bigger ones in Oakland and San Francisco. Yeah.
Well, you lived like half of your life you didn't live in Santa Ana, right?
Yeah.
Well, once you got to the city, what was one of the biggest things that impacted you, that you saw that changed?
When I moved somewhere else?
Yeah, like moving to another city and coming back, what were the major differences?
I was culture shock. So I ended up living in the Bay Area, and back then, I've never seen really a homeless person, right? A young homeless person. Okay, and in Berkeley, there's a street called Telegraph, because it's a different, I got into Berkeley, never visited the school stuff. It's different. Like back then, it's like, we're poor, so I didn't have money to go to Berkeley and check it out before I went. Right nowadays, people do that. I'm proud to say that I was part of an organizing group in Berkeley that now helps students get flown up. Like when they get admitted to Berkeley, we fly them up now, right? Back then there wasn't that. So when my parents dropped me off at Berkeley, right? Because this was my dream school, right? It was my dream school, and it became my dream school because my sisters pretty much said, "You're going to Berkeley," right? And I was like, okay, like I really wanted to go to UC Davis because everybody says that's where you go to become a veterinarian. Pero, so I was dropped off. My mom's hella crying. And then I'm just like, and I have 2 roommates. It's 3 of us in a triple. It's like, my mom's all like, "You're going to live here? Like, why are you leaving home, right? To live to live with 2 other people, 2 people you don't even know, right?" And I was like, she's so right. Like, back home, at least I shared the room, with one other person. And my roommate was Tom. And oh gosh, I just remember his name. Tom was actually Chinese, right? And then Josh was Jewish, right? And then me. We became real good friends, right? We learned a lot from each other, right? But Josh's parents were lawyers, top-notch lawyers, from LA. He went to Harvard Westlake, right? Harvard Westlake is one of the elite high schools in the state of California. Like you pay like 20 grand, like a year to go there, right? Tom went to Brea Linda, right? Smart guy, like all into computers. They all had computers. I didn't have, it's just like you're like Mexican poor, like just like drop you off. Like you got your San Marcos, you got your pillow, you don't have email, you don't have a computer. It's just like, it's just like to you, it's like it's normal, and it was. But then when I saw it wasn't, like people had other things, I was very culture shocked. And then when I walked down the city and I saw like young people, like they're called street kids, young people that were homeless, that were like begging, I was like, whoa, I only see this like in Tijuana. Like and in Tijuana, like when I saw it, it was like people who were like sick, like it wasn't like white young people. I'm like, wait a minute, aren't y'all supposed to be like, it was weird. It tripped me out. It was like, what's going on here? And then the city to me seemed dirty, right? Because I mean, in some ways I was also privileged, even though I was poor here in Santa Ana. But when I was now in Berkeley and Oakland, like things were faster. Like you just couldn't trust people. Like I didn't trust people. Like people were very friendly to me, but still at the same time I was like, well, if I don't trust people, I'm not going to be able to make friends. If I have my guard up, I'm just going to be like this, I don't know, the kid from Santana, so yeah, no, it was a big culture shock. I mean, I went to school here with all Latinos, Mexicans. Over there, I was like the only Latino student, in a lot of my classes. My majority of my dorms were like people were Asian American, but then I was so used to like going to school and being in honors classes, and in those honors classes half of the students were like Vietnamese American, so I made the mistake to think that everybody up there was Vietnamese American, and they're like, no, we're Chinese, so I learned a lot. I learned how diverse our state is. I learned that there are rich people and there are poor people. It really opened my eyes.
Was there something like that hit you when you came back, like to Santa Ana? Like changes you noticed?
The first time, I guess, the first time. The downtown Santa Ana. Downtown Santa Ana. Before downtown Santa Ana was just Calle Cuatro, and it was all those tiendas. There was no Starbucks. There was none of what that is. There was no like Centro Cultural de Mexico. There was like no LHA. There was none of these nonprofits. And so when I came back, I was like, whoa, what are all these things? Because these are things that I was getting used to in Oakland. But yeah, when I was growing up, none of these things were here. So it felt good. It felt good. But yeah, I think downtown Santa Ana was different. The artist village, all that stuff. And también the block. That was not there before either. Now they're the outlet, but they're the block, yeah.
Anything else? We spoke about how Berkeley was your dream school, right?
Uh-huh.
Did you have any teachers or other mentors that helped you get there?
Many. Like, no, not Manny. Yeah, Manny.
He went there too.
What? Who?
Manny went to Berkeley too.
Who's Manny?
In history room?
Oh, what class is he?
I don't know.
2008.
Oh, he's, way younger than me. I'm 99, so that's like 10 years. I don't know any, but I don't really, In junior high. Okay, so you know I said I lived in Mexico, right? So there was 2 times I lived in Mexico. One when I did graduate school and the other when I was a little kid. And when I was a little kid and I came back, you know, I was like in the 3rd grade. And so they put me in like remedial classes, right? Because like se me olvidó, like the English, right? And so, but I knew it, but I was not like everybody else. And so like for 2 years, they would sit me in another table and they would assign work for me. So, and it was like packet work or stuff like that. And those teachers that I was assigned that had me, they were on me. They were like, come on, Rafa, you could do this, you know, you got this. There are some amazing, loving teachers, and they were at Fremont. And then some of them believed in me. They're all like, man, you got potential. Like you could even be honors, right? Like, and I remember I hustled and I tried. I took the GATE test, you know, the GATE test, failed it. I think I was in the 4th or 5th grade and I failed it. And I'm like, oh hell no! I'm gonna get into GATE, and I did, but it was till the 6th grade. Yeah, and it was like, because I was like on it. I don't know what it was, but because I went to school in Mexico, and over there I felt I learned discipline. Because before I didn't. Because before I was like, honestly, I was sent to the principal for talking too much or for not paying attention. I mean, I flunked 1st grade because I didn't know whether I was not in school. I mean, my body was, but my head wasn't, right? And so I learned something when I was in Mexico. And so when I came back, I think I was like más listo, like I was more prepared, you know. But yeah, I would say elementary had some amazing teachers, you know. And then in junior high, I would say like 1 or 2 teachers también. Like one that sticks out of my mind is Miss Abend. She was my social studies teacher. I hear she now teaches at Saddleback, but she was amazing. She had the coolest social studies class. We every month we built something. Pyramids, I don't know, but it was like the coolest thing, and we got credit for it. It was like we didn't have to write reports. We just had to build stuff, and we learned history. That's why I would like come here and like back then, encyclopedias and in high school, Mr. Dyer at Santa Ana High School. He took me to my first ACLU meeting, and he supported me all throughout the Proposition 187 stuff. He always got my back. My other teachers didn't want to say anything. Maybe they didn't believe. Maybe they voted for 187. I don't know if you know this, but 187, when it passed, right? I mean, ended up they ended up taking it to courts, right? And so it never became legalized. But in there it said that teachers were mandated reporters. So if they suspected that you were undocumented, didn't have papers, they would report you to, in this case, ICE. But he took me to my first ACLU. You know what I'm saying? Like, what teacher takes you to like a meeting? An awesome teacher. That's what? The American Civil Liberties Union. And there was when I first learned about Proposition 209, which eliminated affirmative action. That was my junior year, and they eliminated affirmative action my freshman year in college. But I knew because Mr. Dyer, he was my American history, took me to the ACLU meeting. I was like the only like young brown boy there. Everybody else was like white, liberal, I don't know, progressive, smart people. Yeah.
What did Proposition 209 do?
Eliminated affirmative action, which was a policy that would try to bring like equal representation in like schools and hiring practices and things like that. Yeah, and so that was on the ballot. I mean, there was like attack after attack. I mean, that's another like interview, man. I mean, I even wrote a paper about it. But yeah, it was like year after year, there was an attack on people of color. There was like Proposition 209, Proposition 227, the elimination of bilingual education. I mean, there was Proposition 9. I mean, it was the 3 strikes law. I mean, the 90s were very conservative. I mean, at that time, our mayor was Pete Wilson, a Republican. So it was, it was tough times.
Shout
Shout
out,
out, yeah, anything?
shout out to the homies out there.
You know I do.
You want to do a shout out?
I want to shout out to everybody that was, I went to school with. Because they made me who I was, And from elementary, from my friends, my teachers, my friends who I don't even know where they are now. They shaped who I was, and the vision I have for Santana, and for the vision that I think I have for Santa Ana Boys and Men of Color. I want to thank them, for being part of my life. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate you coming out and doing things with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Pablo.